Hi there, and welcome back to the Age and Grace podcast. My name is Andrew, your host, and today we have another incredible guest, Dr. Shari Caplan. She's a true leader in the field of integrative and functional medicine, and Dr. Caplan is the medical director and founder of the first physician-run integrative medicine lifestyle center, where she takes a personalized approach to health, combining both conventional and alternative treatments to help patients optimize their well-being. Now, her expertise is very, very vast, spanning across women's health, weight loss, fertility, menopause, and hormone balance. But she's also expanded her knowledge into areas such as epigenetics, men's health, and even regenerative medicine. With board certifications in anti-aging and regenerative medicine, metabolic and nutritional medicine, and integrative medicine, she is at the forefront of cutting-edge health solutions. Now, if you've ever felt like your body is working against you, or you are looking for science-backed ways to feel your best, then this episode is for you. Dr. Caplan, welcome to the show. And before we dive into today's discussion, I just want to say how excited I am to have this discussion. So let's get into it.
All right, good afternoon, wherever it is that you're listening. Today we've got Dr. Shari Caplan here. She's the medical director and founder of VitalityMD. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Caplan.
So glad to be here.
So you started VitalityMD how many years ago?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say it was around 2012 that I started with the concept and then we had a small location, and then about 2016 moved to this beautiful location. So basically I'm going to sort of say I learned about functional medicine starting around 2010, and that's where I always joke where I started, and I went over to the dark side, which I really think is the light side. So
Amazing. And when you started it, did you have that vision of it becoming what it is today?
it's always been a work in progress, but what do I tell people every day? Eat right, exercise, de-stress, meditate, balance your hormones, replace deficient nutrients, etc. And I would always tell people to do that, and then I would see them a year or so later, and they didn't always institute what I said. So then it was like, wow, I just want to create this space that they can do all of that. And so that was, the start or the inception of Vitality MD. And then, we're always reworking the model, making it better, and creating a nice healing environment.
Amazing. And I remember that a couple months ago, we came here and we were making a short video. And I realized that the amount of expertise you have in these different areas it's a lot. And it's not enough to put into 30 or 60-second video. Hence, here we are today. So what kind of drives that curiosity to become an expert in these different areas?
I just think that, I was, I guess, a women's health specialist, and I did family practice and did a little bit of everything. And then for me, what started me on my journey is that I started having some perimenopause and menopausal issues. And then, there was this big study that had come out way back then. That was the Women's Health Initiative that sort of talked about hormones and how that it increases women's risk of breast cancer. And basically, my background story was that my mom died of breast cancer at the age of 44. And so I never wanted to be on hormones, or, that hormones may increase somebody's risk. And then, lo and behold, perimenopause hit me. And then it was like my brain wasn't working the same. And, I was gaining weight and all these things. And I was someone who was extremely smart. I was a doctor by the age of 24. And all of a sudden it was like, I needed to write things down, or I was tired and, a lot of perimenopausal symptoms. And it was like, shit, I need to do something. And so, I looked at hormones, but that was when, this study came out showing increased risk of breast cancer. And then what I realized was that there's different hormones have different risks. And so that kind of started my journey on learning about the difference. Are there safer hormones out there, and, find out what the truth was. And so that's started me on my educational journey, going to the States, learning, doing a lot of conferences, and then realizing, yes, there are safer ways to do things, and learning about functional medicine. And it's a long-winded answer, but yes, so that's what initiated things. And then I love learning, and I always want to know what the next best thing is, and I want to live better longer, and so do my patients. So I'm usually the guinea pig.
Yeah.
And, once it's been tried and true, then, I implement it in practice.
Yeah, amazing. Because I know that after our last conversation, I realized that this whole talk of hormones and women's health and men's health, it's a very big area. It's a very big topic.
Oh, it's like a sieve. And, you ask one question and I can go down a whole rabbit hole of, topics and discussion. So, and it's very important because in today's world, we're highly stressed. There's a lot of tech around us that makes our life easier, but maybe not so healthy for us in the long term. And also, like, nutrition is really important. I think a lot of us eat the standard American diet, which is great and easy and convenient, but also kind of has a toll on our well-being. And if you don't eat right with time, you will kind of be more inflamed, have higher risks of diabetes or heart disease and whatnot. And I think people are looking for ways to feel better, live longer, and have more vitality.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so when it comes to talking about health and not necessarily just women's health or just necessarily men's health, a lot of this conversation has revolved, I think, on social media and in the news and stuff about hormonal balance. So what exactly does that mean and why does that matter for any of our health, no matter our, gender or sex?
Well, so again, when we talk about hormones, some people are just thinking about the sex hormones more like estrogen, progesterone for women and testosterone for men. But we actually, all of those hormones are important in both sexes, but they're also what are big players is cortisol, which is your stress hormone, your insulin, there's leptin, there's so many more hormones. And when our hormones are in optimal states, then we actually feel better. And if we just go back to just talk about the sex hormones, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, that when they're in optimal range, we actually have more stem cells, we're less inflamed, our immune system works better. We have hormonal receptors on every cell in the body. So, if your hormones are off, then you're off. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, that, oh, it's just, for women, it's just about their bleeding patterns, or "Oh, I have my period, I don't have my period." But no. So why women start having a lot of hormonal issues and symptoms is because of those cells on every body. And so if the brain's being affected, their mood's being affected, or sleep, or causing anxiety
Mhm.
or depression. Each hormone has a different effect on neurotransmitters. So that's why. But also, I think, a lot of women may have hormonal imbalances and they notice they get more palpitations. But again, a lot of doctors may not recognize that.
Mhm.
So a lot of women in perimenopause, menopause may end up in emerge because of palpitations or anxiety or, you know, so hormonal balance, let's go back to that. Why it's important is that basically our bodies don't function as well when our hormones are off whack. So both for men and for women. So, I tend to talk more about women, but I do see both men and women. And, men, when their testosterone starts declining, they, memory, energy, libido, muscle strength, all of that kind of could be waned or run into problems. The same way women start having issues when their hormones start declining.
Right. And I think that's a really good transition into talking about both perimenopause and menopause. So for somebody who's listening, what classifies being in perimenopause versus menopause?
So a lot of traditionally we talk about menopause as being 1 year without having your periods. And that perimenopause, we all thought that was, maybe 2 years or 5 years. That's transition between having normal cycles to not. But it actually ends up that perimenopause is more like 10 to 15 years.
Really? Wow.
So women can start having symptoms or issues in their late 30s and not really appreciate it. And I think also a lot of people, associate perimenopause and menopause with hot flashes and night sweats.
Right.
And, that's it. But, progesterone, I'm going to say, is probably one of the first hormones to go off whack. And that, progesterone binds to the GABA receptor in your brain, which is where Ativan and tranquilizer works. So, often when they have low progesterone, they're all of a sudden having more anxiety, sleep problems, mood. And, it's not necessarily recognized as that, oh, that could be perimenopause. And it's not that you necessarily need an antidepressant, an anti-anxiety, or a sleeping pill. It might be, oh, maybe we need to replace progesterone or balance your estrogen to progesterone ratio.
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Right.
Yep.
So, yes. So, bottom line is perimenopause is where we start to see transitions in hormone levels, and menopause is when we kind of have gone through the other side. Women stop cycling, and they're generally their estrogen and progesterone are low because you're not ovulating, you don't make
Right.
progesterone. And so you kind of lose your natural tranquilizer and sleep aid, and then you start losing estrogen, and again, estrogen in the brain kind of helps with serotonin. So that's our happy neurotransmitter. So that's why women might be a little more depressed or have anxiety. It also helps with acetylcholine, which is executive function and memory. So you can sort of see why we get a little messed up.
Right.
I go on.
Right. And so you've been doing this a very long time. And when it comes to perimenopause, you said, some people might experience it even as early as, their late 30s. And I'm sure you've probably seen situations of that. So for somebody who's going through that, I imagine it's probably quite a shock.
Well, I think a lot of women start having symptoms and they don't really appreciate what's really going on. And then also they may go see their doctor and say, I don't feel well, or, I'm gaining weight, or I'm more anxious, or sleep problems, or my periods are heavier, right?
Hmm.
There's so many things. So the period piece, a lot of doctors clue into, but when it's a lot of the, you know, softer signs or the neuro signs that they often get missed for many years, and then a lot of times women are like, I just don't feel like myself anymore.
Right.
So those are signs to, yes, see a doctor, but potentially see someone who specializes in hormones.
Mm. And so what are some of the more common kind of hormonal imbalances or conditions that you might see on kind of like a daily basis?
Well, because people seek me out, so they already know they feel like they have some hormonal problems, but generally I'll see a lot of polycystic ovaries or PCOS. So that's someone who, has irregular cycles, may have more acne, weight gain. So they
Right.
want something to help them balance their hormones because they also have more insulin resistance where they have more problems dealing with their sugars. And then, again, in perimenopause, then they're going to have some of these symptoms again. So I see hormonal balances all the time, and then we shouldn't forget about our men
Right.
patients that it's very interesting what I see is so because I also do a lot of sexual health. So I do see both women and men who are having issues with libido or inability to orgasm, or men with erectile dysfunction. And I'm blown away where I'm seeing 25, 35, 45-year-olds with erectile dysfunction. Like, that's crazy. And it part ties to testosterone. So we're seeing lower testosterone. The fertility world sees where men are starting to have issues with, producing sperm because their testosterone's off or because of environmental chemicals could impair, their sperm counts and stuff like
Right.
that.
And so what's your opinion on why we're seeing more of that in recent times compared to, in the past?
So I think there's a lot of it. Like, again, nothing is one prong or one problem. So I'm going to say environmental exposures. So, every man made chemical looks like an estrogen. And so if you give a lot of estrogen to men, they lower their testosterone and then they have actually more insulin resistance, which also impairs their hormones as
Right.
well. I think also their diet. So again, if we're not eating healthy and we're eating a lot of processed foods and also which leads to weight gain
Right.
and neuro changes and stuff like that. That's why I think we're seeing a lot of this. And so, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of young guys who are having, you know, early atherosclerosis starting because they smoke, they're not eating healthy, they're not exercising and whatnot. So, very interesting. And then there's a lot of stuff about epigenetics. So, depending on, family of origin, depending on their well being, that it can actually be transferred to the next generation. So very interesting and cool. But
But
yeah,
it's,
so
yeah.
I think the bottom line is years ago we would get away with a lot more things that we should. And now because everything's additive, right?
Mm,
More toxins, more poor diet and whatnot, that we actually have to eat clean, exercise, replace those deficient nutrients, as I said, and balance the hormones. And balancing hormones doesn't always mean taking hormones. It's more, again, cleaning up your diet, and exercise can improve estrogen, testosterone, insulin, and cortisol. Meditating is also
right.
great for balancing hormones. So,
'Cause I think a lot of people, they get told that they have some sort of hormone imbalance, and I think a lot of people, they naturally, their head goes to, well, that means I'm gonna need some kind of medical intervention. How do I fix this? And so how big of a role does those things like exercise, eating
I
healthy?
think those are huge. And even when, clients come to see me, hormones is just one little piece of the puzzle. Like everything is intimately related. And, I can give someone hormones, sure, that's going to make them feel better. But if they're not managing their stress or their sleep, or, if they're really B12 deficient or iron deficient, that really does play into things. And if you're not exercising, right, that also exercise helps improve longevity, right? Helps with muscle mass and strength and posture,
So
like
many
so
things,
many
so many
things,
things.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so if a woman or a man are, seeing symptoms of, brain fog or, mood swings or fatigue, how does somebody, and actually let's focus on women's health for this question. We'll answer it again for the men. But if a woman is experiencing these things, how do they know if it's from hormones or from something else that they may be going through?
Well, so that's where, coming to someone like myself who's going to do much more of, you know, a thorough investigation. So, when clients come here, again, we're doing extensive blood work. We're taking the history first, right? Like,
Mm,
tell me about your life. What's going on in stresses? What's your diet like? What's your
right.
risk factors? And then we do blood work that's looking at inflammatory markers, metabolic markers, nutrient deficiencies, looking at those hormones and not just the sex hormones, but, thyroid, cortisol, insulin kind of thing. And then basically, repleting all of those things. So if you're low on certain nutrients, replace them. If your hormones are out of whack, figure out how to balance them. So sometimes, when you have excess estrogen, believe it or not, fiber can help take
Right.
things out. Also, if highly stressed, that makes insulin and also estrogen off. So meditating, exercising, all of those do play in the role of someone getting better. And so, I don't think it's a one size fit all. I think every patient, when they come in, should be doing a little bit of everything. Hormones, again, only if necessarily, because if we can sort of clean up a lot of things that they're doing, a lot of times things that on their own will get fixed.
Mm. Yeah. And I love that you brought up that point of kind of, being involved with a couple of different things. In my opinion, it sounds like we're similar in that way. It's, the more that somebody can get exposed to different, not necessarily interventions, but, focusing on exercise, focusing on the eating, focusing on getting proper sleep. Each one kind of plays a different role in our health, and there's a lot of overlap between them as well. But I think it's important, like you said, to kind of have, a couple of different things you're doing, not just focusing on, okay, I'm just going to focus on exercising and that's it. I'm just going to focus on my diet and that's it. I think it's the well-rounded approach, right?
Right.
Right. And so you brought up another thing, which actually wasn't something that we were going to be talking about, but I kind of want to dive into it and see kind of where we end up with it. But you mentioned the blood testing and kind of getting the different markers for, different things in our blood and how they relate to our health. So what role or what opinion do you have on using blood testing as a preventative measure rather than just going when you're having an issue, but, going and getting your blood looked at to see where you might be low in things?
Well, I think it's imperative to do get collecting data points, right? And,
Love that.
basically, like I even have patients, sometimes they come in, they really have no complaint. And I'm thinking, oh, what am I going to be able to do for this person? And lo and behold, you order their blood work and, oh, well, they're actually deficient on vitamin D and B12. And so they might have felt well, but then you kind of replace those things and wow, they feel so much better,
Mm.
right? So it improves performance, well-being, and stuff. So, yeah, I think it's very important to look at all of those things and be preventative and proactive. And a perfect example is a test called the hemoglobin A1C, which represents what your sugar control has been for the last 3 months. And generally, it was reserved for people who have diabetes, but I've been ordering it for the last 30 years on healthy people. And I used to get criticized for that. And, so my theory was, well, we know patients have diabetes for 10 years before they're officially diagnosed. Isn't there a marker that we can look and track? And the answer is yes. Well, now it's almost like, oh, it's a given that you should be looking at the hemoglobin A1C, but I did it like a long time
Right.
ago. And yes, so it kind of has a number and it's related to age and stage. So, like, a lot of times the lab will say, oh, well, if you're 6.5, you have diabetes, and anything before that, you're fine. Finally, they're saying, oh, well, if you're between 5.5 and 5.9, you're at risk. And like they risk stratify it. Well, I've been doing that for a really long time. And even in young, healthy patients, like, when you're young and healthy, it should be 4 point something, and the lower the number, the better. So if somebody, like I see so many 20-year-olds who have a hemoglobin A1C of 52%, so if they go to a regular doc, they're going to go, oh, you're fine because you're in the normal range. But no, for a young, healthy person who should be insulin sensitive and manage their sugars really well, they should be a much lower number. So again, how you interpret results are also very different. So a lot of doctors are, if you're in normal range, great.
Right.
Whereas, they'll come to me with the exact same blood work and I'll go, oh, look, your hemoglobin A1C is inflamed, elevated. You have some inflammation. Your Gs are not where I would like them. So,
Yeah.
do you want to be in the normal or do you want to be optimized?
Yeah. And I think that's a really an interesting perspective because I was reading something or watching a video a while back and they were talking about how, I forget exactly what it was, but it was that, majority of people might be considered normal, but does normal mean healthy? It might be that a majority of people are, exhibiting this, but just because, your friend is experiencing this and all the other people in your life are experiencing this doesn't mean that it's healthy, right? And I think that, body weight is one that is gradually increased over time. And again, just because there's,
Let's say even we'll talk about men's testosterone levels, right? I mean, we know that men, when they're in the lowest quartile, have much higher risk of heart disease and other things. So do you want to just be in the normal range or do you want to be optimal, right? And again, doesn't mean that we're going to replace testosterone. It might be, yeah, you need to fix your diet. Yes, you need to exercise and stuff. So yeah, so that's where I'm trying to get people in more an optimal range. And I guess there's one other thing that I'd like to talk about that relates to weight, because one of the, I always say, what are the biggest complaints? Well, one is low libido, brain fog, and then weight gain,
right.
right? So there's a lot of people who are doing things right, eating, exercising, and stuff like that, and they're still having difficulty. And I think part of that relates to either genetics or whatever. And a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal women end up having what we call now GLP-1 deficiencies. So,
All right, what's that?
and you're like, what is?
Yeah.
So again, it's another hormone that or messenger that we have in the body that helps with weight management and appetite. And well, GLP-1 ends up being, what is the medication Ozempic and Mounjaro and all these other ones that have been on the biggest, weight loss discovery, or everybody's on it. Well, it ends up, yes, if you use it in high doses, it's definitely going to help with diabetes and can help with weight loss, but it also could cause a lot of side effects. But replacing GLP-1s in a very small dose, what we call microdosing, could not only help with weight loss, especially for those people who have, done everything right. They're working out like fiends and still not losing weight, and they may or may not be perimenopausal, menopausal, that actually giving them a whiff of this may actually be helpful as long as they're doing other things, right? And so, like, we are actually one of the first clinics probably in Canada that are offering microdosing of GLP-1s.
Right.
So very excited about that. And we're seeing so many amazing results. And not only does it help with weight loss, and some people we actually don't want weight loss, but it reduces inflammation. It
Mm-hmm.
helps with Alzheimer's prevention and treatment, and lowers cardiovascular risk. It helps with
Yeah, wow.
diabetes. I have women and men saying they're sleeping better, and their
Mm-hmm.
alcohol has consumption has totally gone down, and
Oh,
their OCD or their eating noise that they have in their head, that like, oh, I want a snack or whatever, quiets. And so they feel that they have a lot more control, and actually helps with longevity too.
yeah,
So
wow. Yeah, so a lot of things. And so I guess using it in that way would be kind of like having an extra tool in your tool belt versus,
correct, correct. So it's
relying
not
on it.
for everybody, but it's sometimes for that ideal patient who, is doing everything right, and they still are not getting the results that they want, and that there's all these other benefits that were the studies keep coming out showing benefit. So,
Yeah, wow.
and you avoid all the side effects. So.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And so going back to the blood testing stuff, so if somebody was interested in starting to use blood testing as a way of, diving a little bit deeper into where their health is at, maybe they don't have any sort of, symptoms that you can see per se, but they want to just know a little bit more about their internal health. Which sorts of blood tests or markers do you think are kind of not necessarily conclusive, but provide insight into somebody's kind of overall well-being?
Well, that's what I was trying to sort of say. Like, so I use like looking at a CBC and looking at cholesterol and looking at inflammatory markers and insulin levels and that, hormone levels, and then looking at nutrients. So vitamin D, B, zinc, magnesium. I look at something called homocysteine, which if it's elevated, can increase risk of heart disease, cognitive decline, and whatever. And treatments are fairly easy. So, yeah, like, at Vitality, we sort of have a lot of clients who, want to be proactive, want to collect their data points, right? So, some patients come once a year or once every 2 years, and they kind of do that extensive blood panel and get a, 1 hour follow up to sort of review all the things that they can do to optimize their health.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's something that we love doing, and it's fairly easy for us. So.
Right. And it kind of reminds me of this story here, and you'll kind of see where I'm going here in a minute here. There's somebody I know, he had a lump on his neck and he was just kind of ignoring it, ignoring it. Because it's kind of like the old, ignorance is bliss type of
Right.
thing. Right.
Well, if I don't acknowledge it, it doesn't exist,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And so I feel like blood testing is one of those things where it's kind of like, well, you can push it off, push it off, push it off. But at the end of the day, the sooner we know if there is any issues, the sooner you can actually make changes about it. Right. Okay. Interesting. And so we talked a little bit about weight gain as people kind of go through perimenopause. What kind of reasoning is there that weight gain becomes a little bit more common after a certain age? I know you mentioned cortisol being kind of the stress hormone. Kind of where do hormones fill in
So,
that gap?
so weight gain in perimenopause and menopause, I think, is again multifactorial. So we're losing our hormones, and specifically progesterone. So I find that women, when they're low on progesterone, burn 300 calories less than otherwise. So if you're eating the same, then you still may gain weight because of that. Cortisol, when it's higher, tells the body to store things as fat. As we age, we bioaccumulate toxins. So the toxins in our fat also are endocrine disruptors to some extent and mess up our hormones too. Stress, turns off, our sex hormones that is helpful. So as you can see, the answer is not just one thing. And then we did talk about how in perimenopause and menopause, GLP-1 can also be off, and that anybody, I guess, who has some sort of inflammation could be impacted by low GLP-1. So,
Mm-hmm. So many things.
so many,
So many things.
so you're not going to get it's a one thing problem. And that's why studies in medicine often don't show always benefit, because it's not because you're just low in Bs or you're just this. Everything is intimately related. Yeah, it's not a one-pronged solution.
Mhm.
It didn't get one thing that got you here. It
Right.
was multiple things, and it's basically multiple things that are gonna help get you back to
Love
where
it.
you were before.
Very wise words there. Yeah, good. Okay. And so we talked a lot about perimenopause and menopause. So let's shift kind of the last part of the conversation towards a little bit of kind of men's health a little bit more. What exactly is andropause?
So andropause, just like menopause, is when men's hormones start declining. And so usually it's talked about testosterone. Again, there's other hormones that
Wow.
could be at play, but essentially as men lose testosterone, they might lose their energy, their libido, their, you know, confidence almost. So men sometimes with low testosterone might feel not more meek, but just not the same that
Yeah.
they were before, kind of thing. Sometimes their hemoglobin drops because of low testosterone. Their sperm count can change, right? Their moods can change. They can be more irritable or depressed. So there's very a lot of symptoms, but also similar symptoms to women, kind of thing. But again, often men, I think now it's more identified, but in the past, like, a lot of the well-beings, the low hemoglobins, other things would have been ignored and not
Mm.
looked after. I think, with Viagra and Cialis on the market and a lot more men with ED, like they're more willing to talk about it. There's a lot of conversations now about, low T. And so I think men are more open to talking about it with their physician.
Mm.
But again, it's like not all physicians will look at the labs in the same way. So, you might be low normal and your doctor says you're fine, where, potentially I might say to you, okay, there's certain things that we want to do to help raise those testosterones within the normal range. I'm not someone who's like, doping patients or anything. I don't believe in that either. So.
Uh-huh. And do you feel like for men that sometimes it can be a little bit of a tough issue for them to talk about with, sexual dysfunction or anything like that? Because that's almost for men, a little bit of a
Well, so it's very interesting because at Vitality, we also do the P shot, which is PRP in the private area that helps with erections, make them stronger, you last longer. It helps reverse, the aging of the blood vessels, turns back the clock. So, on one hand, I think, I'm a female and some men might feel uncomfortable, but generally most guys, when they come in and we have like this very honest conversation and, they end up like, yeah, I get to hear everything. And, again, I partner with them because it's not just about getting the P shot. It's really like, look at your lifestyle. Your diet sucks. You're stressed to hell. And, if you don't change these things or if you're still smoking or whatever, that if you don't clean that up, you're going to keep seeing me and paying me money. But hopefully my goal is always to make that patient feel better and live longer.
Yeah, amazing. I feel like we've covered a lot today. We've covered a lot of different topics. So what, for you kind of talking to people listening, what would be the big takeaway that you hope people kind of take away from today?
Well, I think that it's, important that if you're not feeling well to seek help. If you feel that you're not getting help at your regular docs, that, seek out somebody who does functional medicine and, will help collect those data points. Don't be afraid to do your blood work. And yes, there's a little bit of work involved in feeling better. It's not just here's a pill for every ill, but there's ways to make people feel better, even if they haven't been feeling well for 6 months, 6 years, or longer. So.
Amazing. If people want to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
So they can always go to the website, VitalityMD.com, and there's a contact me button there. We're at 1769 Avenue Road, and the phone number is 416-792-1100.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Dr. Caplan, for being here today, and thank you, everybody who's listening.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Caplan, this has been a very insightful conversation. I know a lot of people listening are going to walk away with a better understanding of their health and some real actionable steps that they can take. Now, for anybody who wants to learn more about Dr. Caplan and the work she's doing over at VitalityMD, be sure to check them out. And if pelvic floor health is something you've been curious about, then VitalityMD is offering a free demo on the Emzella chair. It's a non-invasive treatment designed to strengthen the pelvic floor in just 28 minutes, the equivalent of 11,000 Kegels. And it's a great option for both men and women dealing with issues like bladder leakage or core weakness. If you're interested, you can book a free session over at VitalityMD and just let them know that I sent you over. So that's everything. That's all we've got for you today. Thank you for listening. And until next week, this is The Aging Grace.